Hello, juniors. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to be together to finish this Spanish 1. It is very important that you all try to learn and understand these things because you must know them next year. Although the first 6 weeks, basically, of Spanish 2 will be reviewed, but you need to know this material. On page, if you have your book, on page 436, now we have talked quite a bit about object pronouns. I hope that you know your object pronouns. On page 436, we're going to talk about using 2 object pronouns in the same sentence. Now, we have already learned the rules for the placement of object pronouns. We know that all object pronouns go before the verb unless it is an affirmative command, in which case it is attached, or if there is an infinitive in the sentence, in which case it is attached. Now, the same rule for placement of object pronouns, it's exactly the same for double object pronouns. You must remember 2 very important things. You never split up the object pronouns. You would never put one before the verb and one after. They will always be together. The other thing you need to remember is that the person always comes before the thing. And if you will look there on 436, if you have 2 object pronouns, more than likely one of them is going to be a person. One of them is going to be a thing. The person will come before the thing. In Spanish, the order of the 2 pronouns is set so that the person always comes before the thing. The order is always like the first English example, give me it. Now, if we said give it to me in English, it will be translated exactly the same as give me it. That is an affirmative command, so of course the 2 object pronouns are going to be attached. Pass me it, or pass it to me. Pásamelo, because it is an affirmative command. The 2 object pronouns are attached. The may, me, comes before the lo, it. Person always before the thing. You need to pass it to me, or you need to pass me it. Either way you say it, it's the same in Spanish. Usted necesita pasármelo. You notice they come after they are attached because it is an infinitive. Now, any other time, any statement or question, if it's not a command, there's no infinitive, the object pronouns will go before the verb. You pass me it. Now that it's not a command, it's just a statement. So, usted me lo pasa. The object pronouns both come before the verb. The person comes before the thing. May comes before lo. When they come before the verb, they are not attached. They are separate words. Do you pass me it, or do you pass it to me? Me lo pasa usted? They come before the verb. Now, please remember in your questions, the verb is going to come before the subject in Spanish. Now, I've noticed on the past tests that we've taken, many of you forget that. You still want to put the subject before the verb. In a question, the verb comes before the subject. The object pronouns are never split up. The person always comes before the thing. If it is not an affirmative command, or if there is no infinitive, the object pronouns will come before the verb. Now, you will be doing the exercises on page 437. You're instructed that in your packet. Now, let's go ahead and look in the next chapter. Turn to page 454. Now, 454, this is nothing new. We have learned how to combine sentences using these words. And if you don't know these words, you need to learn them. And, or, but, when, because, if. These words are used to join two clauses. And we've done this in the present tense. There's nothing different in the past tense. The only difference is your verb is in the past tense instead of the present tense. So, the artist used a brush when the artist painted the picture. So, el artista usó, past tense. Cuando el artista pintó, past tense. Now, please make sure you remember that accent mark. If you do not, if you have pinto, that's I paint, present tense. So make sure you know your past tense endings. And of course, if you're asking a question, the verb just comes before the subject in the clause that is the question. But of course, the second clause, the subject will come before the verb. Did the artist use a brush when the artist painted the picture? They're both in the past tense. So just remember, the only difference in what we have learned before is that you're using the past tense for your verbs instead of the present tense. They are both in the past tense, not as I started to say that one is in the present tense, no. And do the exercises as you were instructed. Now on page 456, you should know this list of prepositions. Some of you do not. Before, after, instead of, until, in order to, without, on, or upon. If you don't know those, you need to memorize them. You're going to be using them all next year. Now, in chapter 26, you learned how to make sentences in the present tense involving prepositions plus the infinitive. I prepare before eating. You know that antes de plus the infinitive is translated before eating. That's the ing form, the progressive form of the verb. Or you could turn the sentence around. Before eating, I prepare. Antes de comer. Now, if we're using the past tense, it's the same thing. You're just translating in the past tense. I prepared before eating. Yo preparé. That is your past tense. And your preposition plus the infinitive is exactly the same as we've learned. Before eating. Antes de comer. So please study that page, refer to it, do the exercises that you were instructed to do on 457. Now, we're going to look at one other thing on page 466. You know that we have only learned the past tense endings for AR verbs. So, of course, we must learn the endings for ER and IR verbs. So that's what we're doing on page 466. You have the endings there for yo, for personal, to, and for we, nosotros. And of course, ella and usted, you know, it's the same ending. Now, the difference, ella and usted, remember for AR verbs, it's a stressed O. For ER and IR verbs, it's I-O, E-O. The O is still stressed, accented. But you must have that I-O. And this is a common mistake. So when you conjugate these on your test, be very careful. For the ER and IR, instead of just the stressed O, it's I stressed O. E-O. So, and of course, the plural ending is ieron. I-E-R-O-N. Now, any plural noun, any plural subject will take that plural ending. Now, the yo form for AR verbs, remember it was a stressed E. A is pronounced. Préparé, yo préparé. But for the ER and IR verbs, it's a stressed I, which of course is pronounced E. Yo permití. Yo comí. Yo respondí. So please learn these endings. That's the most important thing. And on page 468, those endings are listed there for you in that little box. Memorize them. E, iste, emos, io, ieron. So you must learn those. And of course, do the exercises that I've instructed you to do on page 469. Now, I know this seems like a great deal of material, but it's very simply explained in your book. On 470, now you've learned the endings, for regular verbs, for ER and IR verbs, for past tense. On page 470, you're going to learn some verbs that are not regular. And you already know what these verbs mean. You're familiar with them: to see, to give, to hear, to read, to believe. To see, ver, when the ER ending is removed, all that remains is a V. And you add the endings. So you say, well, this verb is not irregular. It is irregular in that it has no written accent marks. So you must remember that. Dar, you notice that ver to see and dar to give. One is an ER verb and one is an AR verb. But their conjugations are exactly the same. They rhyme. Yo vi, yo di. To viste, to diste, and so forth. They're exactly the same. Oír, to hear. You have this Y again to deal with. In the el, ella, usted form and in the plural form. You have the Y instead of the I. So, and then leer and creer. There you also have the Y instead of the I in those el, ella, usted forms and the plural form. Leyó, creyó, and leyeron, creyeron. You have that Y instead of the I. Now, when you do your test, you'll have your book. So you should not miss anything. I will be very strict in grading it because you have your book. You need to make sure you spell correctly verb conjugations and that you put the correct accent marks where needed. Since you have your book, you have no excuse to miss anything. Now, when you look at your test, you're going to notice that it skips from, I don't remember exactly what number, like 35 to, I took out a page that I was not requiring you to do. So that, I know that is true. You have fewer questions than you would have. So you do what's there. Yes, there is a page. The numbers go from 35 to something else, you'll notice, on the test. So do not be concerned about that. That was intentional, because I was not going to have you do that extra translation and extra work. So if you have a question, you know that you can ask me. The verses, you have 2 new verses to learn, and you need to write. If you do not write these 10 times in English, 10 times in Spanish, the new verse, some of you misunderstood that before. You only wrote it once in English. Now, the vocabulary, it's 10 times in English and 10 times in Spanish. Some of you did not do that. Some of you only wrote once in English and 10 times in Spanish. Now, I expect you say, well, that's a great deal of writing. And you know that I'm not one to give writing assignments. But the only way I can know that you at least looked at these words and tried to learn them is if you can write them. So I will be using you will get a verse quiz grade and a vocabulary quiz grade. In fact, 2 of each, just as you usually do. Except they should all be hundreds, since you have your book. Now, I'm sorry that we could not finish up the year properly. But next year, in Spanish 2, that first 6 weeks, we're going to review all this and catch up on this. If possible, please return your textbooks. The vocabulary manual, please keep. You may need that next year. And besides, those vocabulary manuals are yours to keep, and they're great references to have in your homes. You never know when someone wants to know the meaning of a Spanish word or something. So the vocabulary manual is yours to keep. Please return the textbooks. And if you have questions, I will try to be there to answer them.